Chapter 16. Cindy's body was feverish, and her heart was pounding rapidly in her chest. For a long moment, she had no idea where she was, or how she ended up outside the king's chamber. She remembered running, wanting to get away from everyone, and the next thing she knew, she was embraced in the king's arms. She heard Caspian's laboured breathing, and she was too afraid to move in the event that this was only happening in her mind. Sadness filled her gut, because she began to realize that she'd made a terrible mistake. The king could never be hers. She wasn't being fair. However, their chemistry was real, and nothing about it felt like a mistake. It was all so confusing. On the contrary, Cindy was already in love with King Caspian, and that broke her apart. He was an immortal creature who fed on human blood and most likely seduced other women. But Cindy knew in her heart that she wasn't scared of him. She didn't care if he could drain her life's essence away. She'd never felt anything like this toward any other man before. "That was wonderful," she said, trying to discern if he understood her silent message. Her stepmother and stepsisters were downstairs, and they were undoubtedly looking everywhere for her. Either way, the reality of the situation made her realize that there had to be another way. She needed to prove that she didn't steal his painting, and that Martha had only helped her to get to the ball. At the same time, she felt ashamed to reveal the truth of how reckless she'd been when she was younger. Her dark past was causing her to feel uncomfortable. It only served to prove that she was weak and immature. Besides, her stepmother had no idea she had been wrong about her. Cindy could easily adapt to life in the castle. Her father was a man from the working class, and he'd always told her to be proud of who she was. He made his fortune the hard way. The king needed to marry someone who could rule his kingdom alongside him, and Cindy was willing to stand at his side as his wife and queen. She was well-mannered, and she could learn necessary things, watch others in order to support him. She could work hard to be where he needed her to be. Time was moving slowly, and then she felt him planting small kisses along her back. She wanted to enjoy this precious moment together for a bit longer. They were exposed, and anyone could have walked in on them. Cindy's heart pounded with love for the king. She just couldn't explain how she had fallen for him after only one night. She didn't want to go back to the ball and face Londus or her stepmother again. Caspian finally pulled away from her and brought her into his arms. She felt his heart beating in his chest, and she was surprised. Her father had told her that vampires were undead, creatures of the night whose heart no longer beat. Maybe she'd been wrong about the king all along. "We have something special going on here," he said, and she instantly wanted to agree, but had to keep her mouth shut. "I've announced that I need to get married, but there isn't anyone else I want. It's only you. It's always been you." "As I said before, love isn't something I can afford right now. At the time when we met, it seemed I could get away from that stupid arrangement, but now I can't," she said, hoping he would understand. She just couldn't look at him and pretend that she didn't love him. "You never have to do anything you don't want to do," the king snapped, and Cindy thought that perhaps he was still angry over what had happened earlier. She tried to put herself in his shoes, but couldn't. "Someone has stolen the Lourdes painting, the one we were admiring together during the ball. I must have forgotten to lock the door after you left. Now I can't lose you, too." Cindy clenched her fists, wanting to tell him that it was her stepmother, but this could complicate her life even more. She tried to appear shocked, telling him that it was probably someone who worked in the castle. The king didn't want to dwell on the subject. He told her that he had already made progress with retrieving it. Martha was a changeling, and she changed beggars into beautiful horses. Cindy thought of her again, wondering if she could help her in any way, but now it was a bit too late for that. "Come on, put your dress back on. We have a lot to talk about and very little time. That evening, The night we met, I prepared a speech, and then you ran away." He kissed her lips. She felt his fangs with her tongue, and was tempted to ask him to bite her. They dressed quickly, but Cindy hesitated as they headed toward Caspian's chamber. She needed to keep her spirits up, and her head was still high from their steamy encounter. In the end, she accepted his cold hand. "I'm not afraid of you, and I don't know why," she said, knowing deep down the king would never hurt her. Cindy's heart was still pounding away as they climbed the stairs toward the king's private chambers. Her skin was burning up, and she could feel her own becoming stronger with each step. The king looked so handsome, and she wanted him to her again. She knew it was to be their final meeting, but she didn't want it to end just yet. "I could drain all of your blood, and you would die. I could also twist your neck. So maybe you should be a little afraid of me." He chuckled and brought her closer, especially after what happened downstairs. "I know, but for some reason I can't think of fear when I'm with you. My stepmother is most likely looking for me already. I really need to go," she said with a heavy heart. She didn't want to leave him and knew that if she dragged it out, it would be much harder to disappear. Caspian didn't seem happy as he opened the door to his chamber, and she walked inside anyway. She remembered every small detail of their night together. She wasn't even supposed to see him again. Now she was trapped. "Do you really think that I'll let you go after what just happened on the stairs?" he asked. "You aren't going anywhere. I want you to sit down and let me explain everything. After that, you can tell me why you're in such a rush." Cindy liked the fact that the king was so assertive and took control. She realized that this was going to be one of the most difficult conversations of her life. "Tell me, how is it to be a vampire and live amongst humans?" she asked, trying to divert the conversation away from her. She knew she was only making it more difficult for herself. She needed to find a way to destroy Ida's evil plan, but her mind seemed blank. The only other solution was to run away. Caspian smiled, gesturing for her to make herself comfortable on the sofa. She noticed that she could see his fangs again as he smiled, and wondered how it would have felt if he'd bitten her neck. "Be careful what you wish for. I can see in your eyes that you silently desire to be bitten," he growled, and then grabbed her face. For a brief moment he stared into her blue eyes, and Cindy felt as if he could see how much effort it was taking for her to keep her hands to herself. Then he kissed her again, anyway, slipping his mouth, and her knees turned to jelly. The tiny voice in her head kept reminding her that this was what true love felt like. Her heart pounded for this man, this creature, and all the new emotions were causing her to lose her mind. "Why is it that other people have no idea you're a vampire? What about your son?" she asked, trying to pull herself together. "I thought vampires couldn't reproduce." "I can glamour people and make them believe I'm just like them. And you are right. Vampires aren't supposed to father children. But several months after we met, my wife announced that she was pregnant. She was loyal to me and couldn't have slept with anyone else. I felt blessed, although it was a shock," Caspian explained, and Cindy knew he most likely still grieved for his dead queen. He must have truly loved her. "And no one knows? What about drinking human blood?" she pressed on, feeling a little excited about this part of the story. She wanted to know if Caspian preferred to drink from men or women. "I have certain abilities. I can change my appearance, and if I meet someone, I can take over their identity. This way, it's easier for me to leave the castle. Besides, I only need to drink from humans once in a while." Caspian dragged his hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Cindy thought that he was frustrated, and he still wanted her. She knew if she allowed him to kiss her again, she wouldn't be able to control herself a second time. They were here to talk, and that was all. And there are other vampires in the kingdom? I mean, how did you become one? She asked, sounding curious. Others exist, but they're hiding mostly underground, or they're scattered around the country. We tend to keep to ourselves. It's easier to hunt alone, the king explained, and Cindy wasn't certain what to think. Someone must have turned him into a vampire. She knew that much, and perhaps he just wasn't ready to talk about it yet. My maker was old and was just about to die. He used my blood to gain strength and power. I was 45 in human years when I became the blood-sucking monster I am now. Cindy rose from the sofa and sat next to him. She wanted to be close. Her body was betraying her, wanting and needing to experience his wild and intoxicating lovemaking all over again. There was only so much control she had within herself, but the voice of reason kept reminding her that even if she accepted the fact that he was a vampire, she still had to marry Londres, unless by some miracle or magic she could find a way out of it. So how long have you been 45? She asked, and her voice vibrated a little. Caspian wanted her, but she would age eventually and die, while he would live forever. She was smart enough to realize that she wouldn't want him to see her old and wrinkled. I'm still only a young vampire, and have been stuck in this 45-year-old body for about 20 years. My first wife knew the truth, and we were both concerned about our future. We talked about the issue of aging a lot, and then she gave birth to Eric, and was gone from this world. Caspian said, I'm a creature of darkness, and that comes with certain advantages. My abilities are very useful, Cindy, but right now I can't talk about it. You're distracting me, sitting here, and looking so curious. I want to bed you again, beside your sweet flower. Cindy swallowed hard and crossed her legs, aware that was throbbing again. A moment later he was on his knees, touching her feverish. A loud moan escaped her. Luscious heat rose as he angled the kiss, pulling her harder toward him. They just had angry, intense sex, and yet Cindy wanted more. She was ready to forget about the ball and her stepmother, and just stay with the king forever. No, no, focus. This will only hurt both of us, she said, trying to push him away, but he was already kissing her, and his lips felt so good. Her nails were hard, ready to be touched, as burning pooled between the apex of her thighs. She was with desire for him. Her body was pumped with adrenaline. And then the king pulled away. Frustration enveloped his features. He rose from his knees and went back to the other side of the room. That man is not for you. We both know it. So how long are you planning to deny it? He asked. She opened her mouth to tell him what Ida had done, but then felt magical energy hovering over her body. She felt as if she had something in her throat, and she wasn't in control of her own voice. It was physically impossible to tell him. Someone had spelled her to keep her from telling the truth. But who? I'm not denying it, but you're a vampire, and you're lying to your people. Cindy had no idea what was happening to her. It was as if something magical had manipulated her to turn his wild nature against him. She wanted to scream that Ida was blackmailing her, but her throat felt raw and painful. Caspian narrowed his eyes and clenched his fists. He seemed angry, and Cindy was cursed. She couldn't physically tell him the truth. We're on fire when we're together, Cindy, and I don't want to share you with anyone else. You must tell that idiot that you aren't going to marry him. This is absurd. We're made for each other, the king said, sounding angry. He then began pacing around the room. Cindy looked at him with desperation, and she began to realize that something was very wrong. Someone was trying to take control of her mind. She wanted to scream with frustration. "I'm sorry, my lord, but this isn't possible. I have given my word." Her own voice answered for her, as if it had been programmed to do so. Her skin prickled with magic, just as it had during the time when Martha had been turning beggars into horses. Her heart felt as if it was being pierced by a million tiny blades. She didn't look at him as she went to the door. Someone wanted her to keep her mouth shut, and Cindy knew then that Ida had something to do with it. The king didn't stop her, and that hurt like hell. 10 seconds later, she was running back to the ballroom, torn and frustrated. She heard a loud roar and a bang. Caspian must have hit something out of rage, knowing that he had lost her again. She just couldn't experience the same pain all over again. The ball was still going when she returned. She noticed that her stepsisters were talking with 2 good-looking men by the refreshment table. Even Prince Eric was on the dance floor, leading his future wife to the rhythm of the music. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, my Cindy." Cindy heard Ida's voice behind her. "I have certain abilities that no one knows about, and you cannot disobey me. My magic will prevent you from telling the king the truth. The wedding is still going ahead as planned, and there's nothing you can do about it." She turned around, but her stepmother was already walking away. Cindy tried to calm herself, but she felt as if she was drowning in a river of sadness. That was it. She had lost another battle. 10 minutes later, Londas found her, asking her where the hell she'd been. Apparently he'd been looking for her everywhere. Cindy saw the king returning several minutes later. He glanced at her briefly, but his eyes were empty. His usual spark was missing, and Cindy thought that this time she must have lost him for good.